Good morning, and welcome to the Mental Breakdown Morning Show. I'm Dr. Berney Wilkinson.
I'm Dr. Richard Marshall.
And here we are on November 21, Monday,
Right.
November 21, ready to kick off another great week, and it's Thanksgiving week.
Holiday week.
Which has a whole new set of exciting and fun things coming up. But we're going to do something a little bit different over the course of the next couple of weeks, right? We have received different emails, and some of the conversations that we've been having with different people have led us to decide that we're going to put together a series over the course of the next 2 weeks. We're going to do a series of morning shows and even our big podcast on that we post on Saturdays. We're going to do a series that focuses on relationships.
Right.
And we're going to kick that off today talking about relationships and communication.
We're talking about marriage relationships.
We're talking about
relationships with significant others.
Right. Intimate relationships, marriages, and long-term relationships.
Right.
Like tomorrow, of course, we're going to talk about children, having children, and blended families, and all those kinds of things. And so, over the course of this week, we're going to highlight some of the really important aspects of maintaining healthy relationships and what we need to do and how we need to handle different aspects of those relationships. And next week, we're actually going to do something that I don't know that I've seen on many other shows, and that is focus on what happens when things are going wrong.
Right.
So that you know either how to address it, how to respond to it, or when it may be the right time to get out of the relationship.
That's right. So this week will be about forming and maintaining healthy relationships. Next week will be about what happens if all that turns sour.
Right.
And how do you... So this week is about getting together, and next week is essentially about taking it apart.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right.
And with that said, we may want to issue a not a warning, but
a little disclaimer.
A disclaimer,
right?
Because we'll be discussing things unlike most podcasts, which are meant for all listeners.
All of our podcasts, right?
Some of these podcasts, we're going to be discussing issues that perhaps you want to
well, we may be talking about some important things with relationships, like intimacy and those kinds of time together, and sometimes those topics aren't necessarily what some may want their little ears to hear.
Right.
So if you have little ones around, if you are listening to this in your car and you have children in the car with you, some of these podcasts may be ones that you might want to skip and hold on to when you're
listen to
alone
them.
or
Listen
with
to
your
them
partner.
yourself first, and then there may be things that you can share. But
and we're not going to go into any graphic,
No.
anything like that. You're not going to draw any pictures or anything, right?
No, we won't be discussing anything that they can't hear. It's just that you may prefer that they not
They
listen
may
to
ask
somebody.
questions.
It's adult conversation.
Right.
We're going to be having more adult conversations this week. So just so you know.
Okay. So with that said, like I said, today we're going to kick off this series with a conversation about the importance of communication, and I think that it sort of goes without saying that communication is a critical aspect of a healthy relationship. If a relationship, if two people in a relationship can't communicate, well, that relationship is not really going to have a lot of success. Because whether you're trying to communicate positive things, those whispering sweet nothings into each other, or you're trying to resolve conflict, to resolve a problem, the underlying key there, of course, is communication. Being able to talk with one another, share your feelings, share your thoughts and ideas in a way that the other person is going to hear it and understand it.
Right. That's right.
So communication is really important. And so let's kind of talk a little bit about what that looks like. What does healthy communication in a relationship look like? And it begins with an openness.
Right.
We've done podcasts in the past about lying and about kind of adjusting and shifting how we say things and when we say things. But healthy communication is knowing what to say and sometimes more importantly, when to say it.
And how to say it.
And how to say it, right? That's I guess that's the third part. Right. There's always three parts.
Always three.
There's always three.
That's
so
right.
what to say, how to say it, and when to say it.
Right.
And so that's going to vary a little bit from relationship to relationship. Some relationships do very, very well. I know of a couple of relationships that they do great getting up early in the morning and sitting down, having their coffee together, and having a discussion at that point.
Right.
Starting and kicking off the day in a positive way there. Others communicate better in the evening. After dinner, after the kids have gone to bed and everything, then they'll sit down with a glass of wine or water or whatever it is, and they'll sit down and they'll talk then. So
exactly,
you have part of that is going to be knowing what's best in your relationship.
For your relationship, right?
Yeah. Right. And so sometimes you have to communicate about when it's best to communicate.
Right. Yeah. That's right. Go ahead.
Oh, I thought you were.
I'm going to, but
that was your deep breath. Usually your deep breath.
No. It's coming, but later.
Okay. So communicating with your significant other about when to communicate is great. And so I'll have, see, you took your deep breath.
I'm ready now.
You see that?
I am ready to launch.
All right, go.
Okay. We know that the most problems that we have, whether it's in business or marriages or are about communication.
Right.
We talk about there have been a couple of catastrophes with the space shuttle. There was, the one in 1983 or something, the Challenger. That was a communication problem. People weren't communicating with each other, and in a way they were afraid to communicate certain information that they knew. People knew about the O-rings, but they were afraid to say anything about it because it might change because it might change things, or they're naysayers. That was a problem of communication, and most of the problems we have with each other are problems of communication.
Right.
This is certainly the case in a marriage relationship. If you have problems, they're probably problems of communication, and you agree on the big things. You agree on. That's why you wouldn't be together if you didn't agree on most things.
Right.
So your problems are going to be problems of communication.
Absolutely.
And you have to learn in your relationship. You have to learn, how are we going to communicate? What are the ground rules for our communication?
Right. Absolutely, and I think that's the next piece. Once you know when to communicate, the next thing is knowing how to communicate, because there are some words that some can use in the way that they communicate with their significant other, and those same words are unacceptable in another relationship. And so you have to know what those triggers are for your significant other. You don't want to use a phrase or use a term that is going to set your significant other off.
Right.
It's going to push them over the limits to where they're going to respond and begin to respond emotionally and in a dramatic way that's going to really hamstring your ability to resolve the issue or manage the conflict or whatever you're trying to do.
That's right. You have to avoid words and phrases that are going to escalate or worsen any problem that you already have.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So knowing when to communicate, knowing how to communicate, and the last piece is knowing what to communicate.
Right.
And what we mean by that is, what information is it that we need to share?
That's right.
Some people feel, in some relationships, you sort of live your life, I sort of live my life, and then we have this common life together. And as long as both parties are okay with that, all is well. There's no issues with that. Other relationships are different. Other relationships are such that we need to communicate about pretty much everything. Right. We need to know what decisions we're making, what decisions what we're not going to do, what we are going to do, when we're going to do things, and almost everything becomes a partnered decision that we make. And again, you need to know that ahead of time. You need to know that going in. If you enter into a relationship, and like you very keenly said, if you're in a relationship with somebody, there's something there that attracted you there.
Something
you're there for some reason.
Right.
And so you have to be able to get together and communicate some of these things in a way that's going to make sure that you don't, one of the most difficult arguments or fights or discussions to have with a significant other is, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
And say, well, I didn't know I needed to tell you. Well,
I thought you knew.
That probably is something, right? I thought you knew. That's something you should discuss ahead of time.
That's right.
I need to know what you need to know. If I'm going to go out to lunch with a person at work, I need to know if you're going to be upset about that, or be upset because if you were going to think about having certain thing for dinner, or you wanted to do something certain for dinner, and I come home and say, oh, well, you know what, I went out for lunch and had spaghetti. Well, I was going to make spaghetti.
Right.
Well, I'm okay with eating spaghetti twice, I suppose, but you just need to know if this is something you need to communicate.
Right.
Because if your partner gets upset about that, those are arguments and conflicts that are easily avoided, easily prevented, just by a little bit of communication.
Right. And we get into, very quickly, we can get into communication problems.
Right.
We typically, when we communicate, sometimes we communicate just to work out our schedule.
Right.
Other times we communicate more important things that are important at an emotional level. And when that happens, we can begin to enter that problem of communication problems.
Right.
Okay. And there are three big communication problems that most of us who are trying to maintain intimate relationships get into. One is yelling or raising your voice. Okay. You have to be very careful, because we typically don't monitor the tone of our own voice.
Right.
When we listen to ourselves on tape, or we watch ourselves, boy, do I really sound like that? So we're not good at monitoring our tone. So if you start raising your voice, a couple of things happen. When you start raising your voice, you start to get a little more aroused.
Right.
When you get aroused, you start to put emotion into your voice.
Right.
Now, one of the things to remember about emotions is our emotions, we have emotions because that's what keeps us alive. Anger, fear, all those emotions that we have are meant to keep us alive.
Right.
When we start to raise our voice, we're sending a message to the other person to go on the defensive.
Right.
And we say, why are you becoming defensive? Well, they're becoming defensive because they feel like they're being attacked.
Exactly.
Okay? So one of the things we ask people not to do is don't start to raise your voice. Or if you feel like you're raising a voice, that's a good time to stop the discussion.
Right.
Because it's not going to go anywhere good. You are going to invite a defensive response from your partner.
Absolutely. And this is... It's so important to listen to each other, because if your partner is saying, why are you yelling at me? Right. And you say, I'm not yelling. It doesn't really matter if you're yelling or not.
Right.
If the other person is perceiving you yelling, then there's a problem.
You have to step out of that
Right.
and go back to the communication that we talked about at the beginning.
Right.
How do you communicate? When do you communicate? You have to hear what your partner is saying.
Right.
Even if you're not yelling,
Right.
you have to step back because you're doing something that you don't want to do.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing is when we get into that frame where we're getting louder, getting more emotive, what that is going to automatically do is make our partner defensive.
That's right.
And when that person becomes defensive, they're going to become equally emotional.
Emotionally aroused.
Right. And so now we're just kind of playing this game of who's going to get more emotional. And that's when that's when we don't really process information very well. All of that happens when we are emotional.
That's right. And then what that leads to is the second problem, which is competition.
Right.
Competition's good in a lot of ways. We have it in sports and we have it. But competition is not a good thing in a discussion. Okay.
Right.
And we see this frequently with couples therapy. One person feels that he or she must win every argument. If you are in a must win frame of mind, a couple of things happen. You may win every argument. People say, well, let's do this logically. And and men say, well, I want to have a logical discussion. And let's talk about when you have the need to win every argument. Remember that you're diminishing your partner.
Right.
Okay. And when you diminish your partner by this constant need to win every argument through logic and reason and facts, you diminish your partner. And when your partner gets diminished, that's going to put a huge crack in your marriage relationship.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So be careful that you don't move to competition, that you have to win every argument.
Right.
You're not winning the war
by
winning every argument.
Absolutely.
So be careful of that tendency.
Absolutely. Because it should not be viewed as a winner and loser.
That's
it should
right.
be viewed as we're
both...
allies. We're working on the same team.
That's right.
So how do we resolve this issue?
Right.
Yeah.
And that leads to the third problem, which is when we have a me versus we attitude. Okay.
Right.
And because let's face it, when most of us, that chatter in your brain, that stuff that just happens, most of that is about ourselves.
Right.
I mean, we're thinking about what I want, what I need, what I want to do, what I have to do, what is my schedule. And we tend to present that because it's so common in our own head. We sort of present that to the other person of what I, when it should be about we.
Right.
Because how, as you approach the other person, remember that your default setting is about me. Okay. And what you want to do is you want to extend yourself to the other person.
Right.
What can I do for him or her, whatever kind of relationship you're in? How can I make her day better? And there's a great psychiatrist by the name of William Glasser who talked eloquently about this and said, you have to do things for the other person. And if you start taking actions that help the other person, your actions are going to change your thinking.
Right. Okay.
And so behavior changes thinking as thinking changes behavior. So if you're doing frequently we'll hear things like, well, she can't even load the dishwasher correctly. Okay. And
oops.
Yes, that's an oops. That's an oops moment in your life. Instead of complaining about how she loads the dishwasher, you can load the dishwasher yourself for her.
Right.
Not because she can't, but instead of complaining about how she does it, do it yourself.
I was going to say, you're not even doing it for her.
No.
You're doing it
for us.
For us.
Right.
For everybody.
Right. It's not like it's her job to load the dishwasher.
Right.
Who does that?
Right.
So
it's not the 1950s anymore.
It's not. We'll talk about, have a great slide for that.
That's right.
So
great slide.
Figure out.
Like you're in a lecture.
Right. So great. Figure out what kinds of things you can do that through your actions will show your partner that you're willing to do this, and you don't expect anything in return.
Right.
It's not like, well, I'll do this and you do that. No, there's no quid pro quo here. It's, I'm doing this because we're in this thing together.
Right.
And by my actions, I will show you that I care about you and I care for you, and I'm as concerned about you as I am about myself.
Right.
That's the we versus me approach to a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Well, this was a bit of a longer, morning show than we usually do, but it's okay because
this is going to be a big week. These may go a little bit longer.
Yeah, when I do, or I know you do it as well. When we do like parent coordinating and couples therapy, we spend session after session after session dealing with these issues, and so trying to condense it down to a single podcast is actually pretty challenging, because it's so important. It's such a critical aspect of a healthy relationship. So work on your communication. And Mondays is always about what can we do for the week.
That's right.
So
remember
use this week.
Remember we said that one time, a couple weeks ago. We said, use Monday to think about what can I accomplish this week? What can I do that's really positive, really constructive, that I'm going to do this week?
Right.
And this week of all weeks, with Thanksgiving and all the holidays upon us.
Right.
Let's rekindle all those efforts.
Yeah, so really work hard this week to find ways to communicate. And if you feel like in your relationship you're not communicating as effectively as you would like, sit down with your partner and what do you think? Communicate about your communication and say, what can we do to make this work better? Can we schedule a time? Can we figure out, you write down your no words, I'll write down my no words.
That's
and
right.
we'll, sit down together so that we can communicate in a way that's going to be productive and healthy for our family.
Be upfront. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Absolutely. And do it at the right time of day.
Right.
Avoid, don't do it during the nuclear hour. Do it when it's best for the two of you to communicate.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, that's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about children.
The effect of children
what happens
on a marriage.
When kids come into play.
Right.
That's going to be fun.
When they come into play.
That's right. So we will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a great day, and we'll see you then. All right.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.